Wonderful. It looks like it's engaged. All right, so let's get to it. Introducing panelist speaker Kathy O'Grady. So Kathy was a founding member of the Ontario Breastfeeding Committee in the year 2000 and served in various capacities on the board of directors, including as secretary and then co-chair. She saw the evolution of the organization to the Baby Friendly Initiative Ontario and worked with the BFI strategy for Ontario as a representative of the BFI Ontario. As the only lead assessor in Ontario at the time, Kathy sat at the Breastfeeding Committee of Canada Assessment Committee from about 2018. She's been focused on the Baby Friendly Initiative at the national level through the BCC as a co-chair and assessment committee chair, and also internationally as the BCC delegate to the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative Network for industrialized countries. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you.
Introducing panelist speaker Eileen Chewy. Eileen's involvement with Baby Friendly Initiative Ontario began over 20 years ago. She was working at the Halton Regional Health Department as a public health nurse after moving from Calgary. As the lead for BFI accreditation for the health department, as well as the Community Halton BFI group, Eileen became involved and eventually co-chaired the Ontario Breastfeeding Committee of Canada. Eventually, she co-chaired the BCC Province Territory Committee, became a BCC board member, and a BFI assessor. Currently, Eileen is retired and enjoying travel and grandchildren. Welcome, Eileen.
Hi, guys.
Introducing panelist speaker Doris Balcaras. Baby Friendly Initiative Ontario has been a significant part of Doris's career as she worked in labor and delivery as a registered nurse and a lactation consultant. Doris led the hospital to become BFI designated and redesignated after 5 years with significant guidance and support from BFI Ontario. Later, Doris worked with the BFI strategy for Ontario as a health promotion specialist and was privileged to support organizations to assess and implement best practices. Doris is presently working with a colleague to train leaders within organizations to support and sustain the ongoing education required to implement BFI and infant feeding best practices. Welcome, Doris.
Thank you.
And introducing panelist speaker Jillian Salos. Jillian has worked in maternal child health and breastfeeding support for more than 30 years, providing leadership in program development, quality improvement, and system-level change. She's been a Baby Friendly Initiative assessor for 12 years or longer, and previously served as a community co-chair of the BFI Ontario Executive, supporting organizations across the province in implementing evidence-based breastfeeding and infant feeding practices. Throughout her career, Jillian has been a passionate advocate for informed choice, equitable access to care, and improving outcomes for parents, infants, and families. She's best known for her work at Carleton Community Health Centre, creating the Regional Perinatal Parent Support Program, which has been improving breastfeeding and perinatal mental health outcomes in the Champlain region since its inception in 2020, and has approximately served 5,000 parents. Welcome, Jillian.
Okay, thank you, Bobby Joe. And I think we'll move into the panelist discussion, and you can put the first question up so everyone can see it. So the panelists received some questions ahead of time, so they're prepared, and we'll go through each of the questions and hear their responses. So the first question you can see here is, how has the Baby Friendly Initiative influenced your work? And I'll ask Kathy to begin the responses to this question.
Thanks, Mark. You know, BFI provided me as a healthcare worker with the foundations and ethics and evidence-based for maternal and child care and policy development right when my career elevated itself into a clinical management position, and that was all the way back in 1991. So it really gave me my foundations. And then BFHI itself also broadened my understanding of global health issues and population health outcomes and priorities, and to be able to understand a little bit about the World Health Organization and the way that it guides and supports and what its recommendations are. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Eileen, could you answer this question for us? How has BFI influenced your work?
Okay. I'm honored that you included me because I am in Calgary now. I actually was involved with BFI Ontario at the inception, though. And I have to say, it's so nice to see so many faces and so many names that I do know from the past. And what Kathy said, she was my mentor. A lot of what she says is what is applicable to me, but I'll tell you a little bit of my story. I really worked in public health for the majority of my career. And it's been over 35 years, and I am happily retired now, but I have had, I think BFI, once you start understanding it, it becomes part of you and everything you do. The one thing is, I have always worked in maternal child within community health, but in many locations across Canada. The last 12 years have been in Calgary, so I have seen different provinces models, and I guess throughout my work with the BCC and as an assessor throughout with that lens also, but also on the ground with different provinces. In 2003, my family moved from Calgary to Oakville, as Mark had mentioned. And I started working with the Halton Region Health Department. I was the only program LC that they had in the health department. And so slowly I became the clinical educator and actually became the lead for both the BFI accreditation, which was still quite new in Ontario. Halton was the fifth health unit to actually achieve that. I also was the lead for our community health a coalition, which really was a very active one. And so we did have a lot of community as well as professional. So the BFI messages kind of started integrating throughout. There's 4 hospitals in Halton region too, so we did have a lot of impact on the hospitals, I think, too here. I think once you become aware of the requirements and the outcomes that are attained by BFI standards, and like Kathy had mentioned, how it's very evidence-based, and with time we've had more evidence supporting everything. I do find that you incorporate, or at least I find that I incorporate the messages throughout the staff education, community campaigns, direct services to clients, other healthcare professionals, anybody I meet. So that's kind of how BFI has impacted my work.
Okay, thank you, Eileen. Doris, I'll ask you the same question. How has the Baby Friendly Initiative influenced your work?
Well, working in the hospital, I found that BFI really guided my personal nursing and lactation practices and gave me the tools to incorporate best practice strategies into my everyday work. And it was really amazing to see that once I started implementing those strategies, the difference that it made for my job and for the families as well. I just think that for me, it guided me in best practice strategies and knowing what best practice was, and something that I really feel is a professional responsibility for anyone working in the healthcare field. So how wonderful to have this guideline to guide our practices so that we know that we're doing the best possible job to give families the best outcomes. So in a nutshell, that was it for me.
Thank you, Doris. And Jillian, what is your response to this question? How has the Baby Friendly Initiative influenced your work?
Well, like everyone here today, I've always been an individual champion, but what BFI really did is made me feel a lot less alone. It helped my organization shift the responsibility of protecting, promoting, and supporting breastfeeding away from a few designated individuals and made it something that was an organizational accountability. And I feel like that was the biggest gift that BFI gave to me from a professional standpoint.
Okay, thank you so much, panelists, for your responses to question 1. And Bobby Joe, we'll move on to question 2, if you will.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. So as you alluded to, we'll start with Eileen with this question. So why does the BFI matter to you?
Okay. It's a good question for me because I think I've always believed in breastfeeding and it's, but I find that baby friendly initiative is more than that. You could say that it's just best practice. The health benefits for moms and babies are well known, but it's much more than that. The BFI, it supports practices that promote breastfeeding, but also ensure safe feeding for infant formula. And it's supportive of all family decisions. I think that for me, that actually helps make a business case for other people who are maybe not as pro the idea of maternal child breastfeeding. You can make a business case for savings, for cost for staff time, illnesses both acute and chronic. Decision makers often need more than just feel good information, and I find that the baby friendly initiative is more, in my opinion, is just a bit more inclusive. So it does really support and actually hopefully helps advance what we really want, which is our goal of inclusive long-term breastfeeding. I also feel that the social determinants of health as breastfeeding can provide food security. So as many know, issues with food formula contamination, even malnutrition of necessity, which is a friend told me, when the budget runs out and you just need to stretch the formula a bit more. So to me, baby friendly initiative is just the inclusive part. It can appeal more than just the word breastfeeding, even though that is our goal, if that makes sense. Hopefully it makes sense.
Absolute sense. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And Doris, what does the BFI matter to you?
I think for me personally, it gives me the confidence and the personal satisfaction of knowing that I'm doing everything that I possibly can to promote best outcomes for all families. I think that it's really helps families to get accurate current information so that they can make the best decisions for them, their families, and their newborn. I'm very passionate about supporting the healthcare providers. And I think one of the things that BFI did and continues to do is to give healthcare providers the information, but also the tools to know how to provide that information to families, how to provide the support. Particularly for me, it was in those first few days and weeks. And understanding that BFI is way more than just infant feeding and breastfeeding. It's about supporting families and infants to have the best possible start in life. It's about bonding, better outcomes like better blood sugars, which means less interventions, which means less work for staff. And we know that the staff workload is a significant part of what all organizations struggle with, minimizing and getting all of the jobs done in a timely manner. And I think that when we have a really good start and we can minimize the need for those interventions, it really has a significant impact on that. And that's a real plus for BFI, because staff workload is a really significant challenge. So those are just a few of the things that I think are really important.
That's great. I can see that educator piece come out in you just now. We're on to Jillian. What does the BFI matter to you?
Well, I think I was talking about this a little bit just when we were offline before we started the full session, but I think it frustrates me that in 2026, breastfeeding is still not supported as a biological norm and as a public health priority to the extent that the evidence warrants. Too often, I think it's viewed as optional rather than something that requires coordinated policy, workplace, healthcare, and community support. And we continue to struggle with the misconception that promoting breastfeeding and protecting parents' feelings are mutually exclusive, when in fact families deserve both evidence-informed information and compassionate, non-judgmental support. And this is one of the reasons I love BFI, is that it embodies this. And that is why it matters to me.
Very nice. I'm seeing a lot of nods there. Thank you so much, Jillian. And Kathy, what does BFI matter to you?
Oh, you've all said so many of the main things and the main nuggets that pull my heartstrings too. But I feel that BFI matters most to me because I've seen it work everywhere. I've seen it beneficial in whatever percentage it can be implemented, whether it's a piece of one step, it makes a difference. And it supports families in resource poor and in highly resourced situations. And it just makes us understand that, there is this roadmap that can deliver, affordable, safe, and sustainable, and feasible, and evidence-based practice or support for families wherever they are. And mothers and babies need the same things. It doesn't matter where on this planet you're born. And I think for us as healthcare workers, having the confidence in knowing that you don't have to be a rocket science in the breastfeeding world to make so much difference in a family's experience. I think it reflects closely. I reflect really well on what you said, Doris, too. It's as much about empowering healthcare colleagues as it is about ensuring equitable, respectful care to families. So it really has formed me both as a person, but also as a professional.
Thank you so much, Kathy. My goodness. That was a great response, as all of them were. I think we're moving on to question number 3. Mark?
Yes, and I can see it on the screen now. So I'll begin with Doris for this one. What do you see as being some of the biggest challenges BFI Ontario has faced, and what helped to overcome them?
Wow, that's a loaded question. And so I'm not going to go through everything, but I think just some of the initial things that I wrote down is I think initially it was a perception that BFI is about forcing people to breastfeed and that it didn't support all families, just only those that were breastfeeding. And it was perceived as the breastfeeding friendly initiative instead of the baby friendly initiative. And I think it got a lot of pushback and negative response because of that. I think the 10 steps were also seen as rules, and BFI was there to enforce those rules. I think senior leadership in organizations really didn't understand the value of implementing BFI and how significantly it could impact patient outcomes in so many areas other than just feeding. And as a result, designated education funds for staff education just were not a priority. And staff didn't have the understanding or the tools to implement the strategies. And I think also BFI is about change, and change is hard for a lot of people. And so asking them to make changes was really hard. So what did we do to overcome these things? Well, I think over time, I think we have softened our approach and really helped to broaden the understanding that BFI includes so much more than just infant feeding. It supports transition to this new world, pain management for painful procedures, early bonding. And healthcare providers have understood that here is evidence that they can share with their families, and we also can give them the tools to know how to do that. Many have said that, okay, I understand the importance of BFI, but I don't have a clue how to implement that or how to have those sensitive conversations with families. So giving them those tools, I think, is really critical in helping them to know how to share the information in an unbiased and sensitive manner. And I think through ongoing education, as well as experiencing firsthand the difference that these strategies make, has really helped to implement and help it to become much more common. I'm sad to say it isn't everywhere yet, but we've made great strides. And I think that it's because we've really helped them to understand that BFI is so much bigger than just infant feeding and just breastfeeding.
Thank you, Doris. You've made a lot of good points. Jillian, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges BFI Ontario has faced, and what do you see as helping overcome them?
Well, Marg, I'm glad you picked me next because I could just say ditto to what Doris said. You nailed it, Doris. Absolutely. There's not a whole lot I think I could add to that, but I will. I'll add one or two little pieces. I I really think one of the biggest early challenges that BFIO had was herding cats. Well-meaning cats, but there were lots of cats out there that, you know, we needed to bring together all of these individual champions at all of these different levels within the community, within the hospitals, and really help integrate systems change. That was a really tall order, but certainly I think it is something that has really been done. And it's been done because we have been able to build those resources and the leadership commitment and build staff competency and available training at all of the different levels. And that quality improvement piece, which is so important. And I feel as if over the years, we have been able to move in this direction where we're all moving together. We're not all out there needing to be gathered anymore. We're all in the stream together. Some of us are further along the stream than others, but at least the stream is there and it's pretty well defined, and most of us are in that stream. So I do feel that that was a huge challenge that has been overcome.
Okay, thank you. And Kathy, what would you say to this question? What are some of the biggest challenges BFI Ontario has faced, and what has helped to overcome them?
Okay, so I thought hard about this one, and you might want to disconnect me after this piece, but I'll just say what I want to say. You know, I really, having seen and been part of the launch of Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative at the beginning, I arrived in Canada with the understanding that I had gleaned from that perspective. And I feel like from the beginning in Canada, there was poor messaging right from the outset about what BFI really is. And it reflects right back on Doris and Doris's point there about, you know, thinking that it's just about breastfeeding. And there was a lot of may I just say, a lot of castle building, as there always politically is about, you know, who are the experts about BFI implementation. So it took a long time for all of that to kind of work its way through like teething problems. But I feel regret that right from the beginning, the message wasn't much more clear about what BFI really is. And the second thing is that lack of sustained support and recognition, an attitudinal thing from healthcare system at a ministry level. Over the years, we've had sporadic enthusiasm and support, and we've even had some financial support at one point when they, which led to the development of the BFI strategy for Ontario. But they, you know, as politics, as the system changes, so do the priorities. And I feel like as you've all said before, that fundamental belief in public health and hospital critical care, that the mother-baby diet is foundational to health, and that doesn't seem to be consistent. You know, it just depends on which way the wind is blowing. So that's just me in my old age getting cranky, but that's me. And then the last thing on this point, thank you for the time, is that if we had more consistent dialogue and support and recognition from the Accreditation Canada component, our partners in Accreditation Canada, you know, it needs to be consistent. At one point, many of our key principles were built into their structure for accreditation, but that also seems to wane. You know, it comes and goes as they renew their tools. So I really would like to see those three things as sounding boards for whatever our working groups might decide needs to look at for our new strategic plan for BFI Ontario. So sorry to be miserable, but that's my take.
No, not miserable at all. Okay, Eileen, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges BFI Ontario has faced, and what has helped to overcome them?
Okay, I have to say, you guys, if all the comments have been so good to hear, and I'm kind of coming from my answer a little bit more from afar because I haven't been intimately involved lately. One of the things that I do see though is Ontario is a large province, and I know that there's been restructuring and all the rest, but I know way back when I was involved in Ontario, there's 36 health units, and I know I don't know how many hospitals. So everybody's going to have a little bit of a variety with urban and rural. So just even the physical size and complexity of the province itself makes a difference. And resources that support breastfeeding aren't always readily accessed. Funding, staff availability, management support can vary throughout the province. And I think that this is a global statement, but that's something I think that we should also remember that does happen. And I know it came across to how the ebb and flow, things are very positive at times and not so much at different times also. Consistently, families know about the value of breastfeeding, but they don't always recognize all the other values that we actually see too, the long-term exclusivity. And formula has a real commonplace, lots of marketing, lots of acceptability. So it's very hard to promote BFI messages when formula is still considered a very acceptable alternative and looked at as often very equal. The one thing I see Ontario having, you guys, you have a very long-standing history of wonderful people that are knowledgeable of BFI. And some of them are on the panel right now. And these mentors are invaluable in terms of supporting others moving forward. So that's my little bit, but everybody's comments were very, very good.
Thank you, Eileen. Let's move along to the next question. Question 4, Bobby Joe.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And so, Jillian, we're going to start with you. What are some stories or moments that personally stand out to you from involvement with BFI and BFI Ontario?
Well, I think just to go back to what Kathy was saying, the thing that stands out the most to me really was how elated and excited we all were, but I was in particular, when we had the funding and the mandate for public health units across the province to become baby friendly. And what also stands out is the heartbreak of when that was no longer something that was a mandate, and how fast so many of those public health units dropped their pursuit. And it was a real moment of reflection for me. And I was shocked, quite frankly, to see how quickly it was dropped. And I thought, okay, what do we need to do to make this something that every public health unit actually wants to achieve? Where's the roadblock? And it can't just be that we're too busy and we have too many priorities, because that's always the answer to everything. So, I think I was talking about it earlier, that this concept of breastfeeding being completely separate from the birthing process, we would never in a million years leave a woman unsupported around preeclampsia or a postpartum hemorrhage risk. But we are absolutely happy to do that with regards to breastfeeding. And right now in 2026, with the evidence that we have on the impact that breastfeeding has on so many aspects of life and long-term health, it is inconceivable to me that this is not a top public health priority. And so I have to say that is one of the biggest moments in this journey for me. And I wish it was a more positive one, but it was positive in the beginning. And I would really like to see that happen again. And I just think, just to go back to what Kathy was saying around accreditation, I do feel that that's a really important policy trajectory for all of us to be on, is to really make this a priority at the accreditation level. And I think that will help right across the whole system.
That's great, Jillian. Wow, what a great response. Kathy, what are some stories or moments that personally stand out to you from your involvement with BFI and BFI Ontario? Oh, you're on mute. There we go.
Oh, thank you. I think the launch, the inception of the Ontario Breastfeeding Committee, as it was at the time, that was for me very exciting and pivotal. But the next thing was 10 years later, when the BFI, when the provincial breastfeeding policy was formulated as a result of advocacy work from the public, and BFI Ontario and also advocacy and leadership from Jack Newman. And so that coalition got together and they took a draft policy and they took their arguments and they made their arguments at the ministry. And that meeting really changed things because that was the launching point for things like the development of the Born database. It led to the funding for the BFI strategy. So, I think that collaboration with the parent voice, as well as all the different multi-sectoral parts that BFI Ontario was at that time, I think that was something incredible that happened there. And we underestimate and often overlook how important our participation in developing the Born database was. BFI Ontario worked really closely with them when they built that. And you can see when you fill in your data for that Born database that it really reflects the BFI strategy, the BFI implementation guidelines and the indicators very closely. And we are one of the few provinces that has a system like that. And I think that that's something that we need to shout a little bit louder about. I think that apart from that, other things that stand out would be the defense of BFHI and the indicators that was made by a small group of us that answered the challenge of some MOHs in Ontario to the value of BFI for public health. And that was around 2017, and they questioned the validity of some of the evidence for BFHI globally, and just a generally difficult meeting there. But it actually was quite important for me because it made my brain shake up to such an extent that when the WHO brought the new guidance document a year or two after that, a lot of their points were reflected in the shift, the global shift on some of the focuses of what BFHI should be and the accreditation process, the designation process should look like. And so my personal difficulties with that confrontation actually helped me to grow into the acceptance of a whole shift at a global level too. So, those were big things that happened to us as the organization as well, that we had to actually stand up and defend BFI at that level of MOHs. And it wasn't many of them, but we all know that old saying, the loudest voices are often not in the majority, but they have a huge influence on the rest. The other thing that stands out for me is how the withdrawal, as others have said, the withdrawal of prioritizing BFHI and the accountability agreement has led to the decline in uptake or reuptake of BFI designation. But more impactful is the declining breastfeeding rates in Ontario since the time when the accountability agreements ended. So it really just proves the need for us to have that advocacy at a ministry level. And maybe we will need to look at how to go back to our successful strategies, the things that have worked over the decades, like, collaborative advocacy work and looking at how do we make the case, which I know Ontario has done. There is a case document that was developed about what it costs to implement BFI and what the savings are in healthcare dollars. And maybe that all needs to be just shuffled around and dished up again and again and again. So, I've seen the growth of the organization in tandem with the growth of the global perspectives around BFI. And there's so much absolute hope in me when I look at this group, because it's a very different, diverse, collaborative, multi-skilled group of people that I'm seeing on this call. And the hope is that as BFI Ontario grows and embraces the new way of doing things, the whole focus on quality improvement, the staged engagement of facilities. We're seeing at BCC such a lot of enthusiasm for the new way for doing things. You know, the virtual assessments are amazing. They've had such a different impact. We're seeing much more enthusiasm generally. So I think that just sticking together and working on the quality piece of it will get us where we want to be, which is a reversal of the declining rates and more facilities being actually going all the way through to being designated. So we know that commitment is huge, and that commitment proven by being designated is what supports all the other facilities that don't have a lot of hope of becoming designated anytime soon, but it supports their effort as they work on it, you know. Sorry for taking so much time. You chose the question though, so there you go.
No, that's great. I feel like we're getting a lot of history here, which is going to be fantastic when we get into the breakout rooms. So Eileen.
Okay, hi there, you guys are going to hear more history here. And actually, I was in Ontario in the heyday, like, and it makes me realize also age-wise that I feel like I'm feeling older when I have to answer this question, because this was my favorite question, because in terms of personal involvement with the BCC or the BFI and BFI Ontario, I was there at the very beginning when we really had a provincial group, health units that met monthly. And at that time, there was not a lot of structure. We just had teleconference. Anybody that knew something about BFI and was working towards BFI would share what they were doing. So it was really a lot of advocating. Health department management provided, and this is, I guess, to me, one of the successes and changes that happened that I saw was initially these calls happened after work hours. You did it because you wanted and believed in the cause. But with time, we actually had the health department supporting staff to attend calls during the workday. And I think that something just like that was just making them realize that the breastfeeding BFI was considered important. So I thought that was a big success that I saw happening fairly closely to the beginning of the 2000s. And with time, we actually also developed a hospital system like that too. So there's a lot of just supporting each other in Ontario. Even the change of the name of Ontario Breastfeeding Committee to BFI Ontario, some of you will remember Ontario Breastfeeding Committee as a name, but we actually, with a bit of talking and advocating over a couple of years period, we decided that we would change the name to BFI Ontario. And largely, I had mentioned earlier the idea of trying to increasing the scope to be inclusive of all feeding methods, but also looking at the steps and all the measures that do support breastfeeding in the end, and just showing that too. And I do think that I know in my own health unit that did help advance BFI, because they didn't feel it was just breastfeeding, because I think that the word at that time sometimes just stopped people in their tracks. They wouldn't look at anything more. I was also, like I say, very fortunate when I was working in Ontario to have a very supportive management and skilled volunteers that were able to advance a lot of things that were happening in Halton. And we were very supportive of other health units. And I think all the health units that were involved with BFI and breastfeeding, generally we tend to support each other and share what we've learned. So we had ongoing breastfeeding education that was offered through Halton BFI. A secret weapon is that Kathy O'Grady was living nearby and would help provide the education. So what we actually found that we had such turnout that we actually had the local Tim Hortons would ask us when we would hold a course, because they had to increase their staff because so many people came from within the region, but also without the region too. The BFI structure, like the Ontario Breastfeeding Committee, we developed a structure, the first website. All those things were things that were happening when I was around in Ontario and it was involved with, and it was a really exciting time. We were talking about the partnerships like Best Start, Health Nexus, which I understand don't have funding any longer. We were collaborating with these organizations on BFI common message papers, and doing the infant feeding surveillance, being involved with born data collection. The week I left Ontario, I know somebody mentioned this, but it was myself, like Jack Newman and Anne Kirkwood, if you remember her, a few other breastfeeding advocates were privileged to meet with the ministers of child and youth and the health and long-term care minister at Queen's Park. And shortly afterwards was when we had the BFI embedded into the community accountability guidelines and funding to provide advancement for BFI in the hospitals. So I left on a real high note, and I was very, very proud of Ontario. As you might know, not all provinces have adopted BFI to the same extent. You have a wonderful history and a lot of people that have seen successes, and I hope that it does continue on. But I was very fortunate that I was involved in a lot of the fundamental setup of BFI Ontario and saw some amazing changes. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Eileen. And Doris, what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm so humbled to even listen to all of the comments that are made. And I wanted to say thank you to all of you for the huge groundwork that you did to prepare the path for me once I started getting involved in BFI, because I know that so much of my journey was made a little bit easier because of people like you. And when I think about a moment that personally stands out for me, and that would be the moment that I met Kathy. Because she was such an incredible support to me. When I became the lead at our hospital for BFI, I remember one of my colleagues, one of my closest friends saying to me, "Oh my gosh, Doris, you're not going to become one of those crunchy granolas with that skin to skin and the baby crawling up the breast." And I honestly didn't even know what to say. And so I said nothing. And I just said, you know what? I don't want you to believe what I say. I want you to just try it. Just try it. Put the baby skin to skin and just see what happens. And I will tell you that she became one of the biggest supporters of Skin to Skin and BFI, because what we are saying really works and it really makes a difference. And so having the courage just to start with that little step makes a big difference. One of the other things that happened at the hospital was that people, staff in particular, said, you know, it's not my job to convince women to breastfeed. And I said to them, you are absolutely right. It is not your job to do that. However, when that family has made a decision, it is your responsibility to support that decision. So when a parent comes in saying they're choosing to breastfeed their baby and they run into challenges, you need to know how to support them and respect the fact that they have made an informed decision to breastfeed their baby. And how are you going to support that? Because throwing a bottle of formula at them is not supporting their decision. So great conversations through that. I also found that there was significant lack of support for the families who had made an informed decision to infant formula feed. And whether it was just to supplement or to fully feed with formula, not only did the staff not know how to help that family to safely prepare and store formula, and we're still hearing that from healthcare workers, that they don't really know how to even have a conversation with families to make an informed decision, how to have a respectful conversation without showing bias. And so often they say, well, I just don't even talk about it because I don't know how to talk about it. So one of the things that my colleague Yolande Lawson, she has her experience is mostly community and my experience is hospital. So we are working together to work with healthcare providers to, number one, help with consistent messaging throughout the continuum of care so that families don't say, I hear something different from everyone. Every healthcare provider is telling me something different, but having that consistent messaging across the continuum of care and really helping healthcare providers have the tools so that they know how to support families to make an informed decision that's best for them, their baby, and their situation. So an interesting quick story. Yolanda and I were teaching a group of healthcare workers in the North. And I mean, people have already said that, you know, in the North is quite different sometimes than families, their experience in families in the city. And one of the participants was pregnant with triplets. And she came from a family that had never breastfed before. And she was really overwhelmed with all of the information that she was getting during this workshop. And she was intrigued with all this information and really gave us challenging questions. And she was so hesitant and nervous, but also excited about the fact that she could actually maybe do this. And so it was amazing to see how her understanding evolved throughout the workshop. And by the end, she said, you know what? I think I want to give this a try. But she recognized that she would not be able to do this on her own and she would have to rally family and friends together. So she did that. And as a result, she is now well known in Northern communities as someone who breastfed triplets and has become a strong supporter to many other families. And she's widely shares her story. And it's amazing how one story, one person can have such a significant impact. And it starts with each one of us just taking a small step that can result in really big changes.
That's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, things are different in the north. I'm way north, so and so is Angie, yeah, and a few other people on this call. So thank you so much for sharing those responses, everyone. I think we're going to move on to our last question for the panelists, and I hand it over to you, Mark.
Okay, so this question is about the evolution of breastfeeding and infant feeding support in Ontario since the year 2000. And maybe we can begin with Kathy on this one.
You guys, I think this meeting and the things that have been said have kind of encapsulated that whole evolution. We've had such great input. I think that if I was to add anything, I would say that certain milestones, like, looking at the groups that formed for hospital support for BFI implementation, and there was a group for community public health implementation, and that led to us identifying champions for BFI, whether that was hospital or community public health. I think that was a great strategy that had value. I also think that we did things, we saw things like the Ask an Assessor sessions that made it possible for facilities, individuals to just chat and ask their questions to clarify BFI generally and the assessment process. And then it evolved into, a more integrated sort of approach with the BCC, and we saw some of the BFI roundtables broadening that ability to do some peer support and sharing. And then I think one of the biggest cues that we've had for Ontario was the National Breastfeeding Week webinars, especially the one that launched the More Milk Sooner strategy, because I think that truly is a practical, evidence-based, down-to-earth, accessible piece that really is so freely shared by those people and so easily taken up by us all. So I think thank you for all of that evolution. I think we've got a really good reflection in this group of how far we've come and what the hopes are for the future. There's so much potential in this group sitting around this table right now. I'm very pleased to see it.
Okay, Eileen.
I really have very little to add to this because I haven't really seen the evolution. I kind of, from a distance, I've kind of the bigger trends I've noticed. One of the things that kind of I was thinking of as we're talking though is messaging, changing it with the different generations. I find that I have adult children, and they talk about the millennials versus the Gen Xers versus whatever, and how they actually react differently in the workplace. And I'm wondering if that's something that has also been seen by you in terms of messaging and in terms of even uptake of different parts of the program or whatever. But I thought that would be something that might be just kind of to keep it on the side to think about how they really, like the old school ways of approaching advancement might be different than what is needed now. But I have nothing to add. Kathy did a great job, as usual.
Okay, we'll move along to Doris. What would you say about the evolution of breastfeeding and infant feeding support in our province since the year 2000?
I think one of the things that I've noticed when we're doing workshops is that People really want to see the research that supports what we're saying. And there is more and more research that's being done, and that's really supporting it. And I think that's a really positive thing that's been happening, and just really making sure that we present that research so that they can, so that helps them have courage in saying the things that they want to say to families and support families. I think that we're really also focusing on recognizing that it is a family's right to make the decision that they choose to make, but we also have a responsibility to give them the tools to make good decisions for their family. And I think that we're doing that more and more, and we're doing that collaboratively with hospital and community together, so that the messaging is the same right across the board.
Okay, great answer. And Jillian, what would you say in response to this question?
Really, I'm going to echo what's been said before, and maybe just leave one concise sentence that says that I think we've done a really great job at pulling what was a largely fragmented system into a much more coordinated and evidence-informed provincial network. And I think there is still work to be done there, but I think that that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you to all of the panelists for sharing your insights, and we'll move along in our agenda to the breakout groups, I think.